Well, good morning again, friends. Richard Clinton here for another Fire Pit Conversation. I pray everybody's having a blessed week and are doing well. And it's good to be back. And I'm sitting here on a late May, early morning, and dodging in between showers here, and got some rain dropping in and out of the trees on me. But I just thought it'd be worth getting wet for a little bit and just come out and be able to sit out by the pit and be able to talk to you all a little bit about what's been going on in my heart and kind of how God's continuing to kind of work in my life in some good ways. And I pray this offers some encouragement for you again this week. So yeah, it's been quite a week. It's just coming through Memorial Day, so it's a short work week for most of us. And that's been I always throws the days off, so I always forget kind of what day of the week it is. I even had supposed to have my men's group Tuesday nights this past Tuesday. I got through the day and just totally completely forgot what day it was, and completely forgot that we were on a meeting week. So it's funny how those things happen when it comes to holidays and all that. So but anyway, I really just wanted to share some thoughts that really God has really been pouring in my heart this week as I process through Morgan Snyder's new book, Becoming a King. Coming through the first several chapters of that, and it's been such a wonderful blessing and gift on my heart to be able to receive that book and be able to begin to dive into and recall many of the things that was opened up for me 4 years ago. Actually, this week at this very day, I was on day 3 of the Become Good Soil Intensive in Colorado, and at that weekend, it's a weekend that's really there's an intense process. It's called an intensive for a reason, not just the process to get in, but because of the things that are opened up through the course of the weekend that we get the chance to dive into. And at that weekend, there were so many things that God really showed to me and to the men that were attending. And but just like with anything, and just like we share with men that attend the Anvil weekend, or whether you go to Wild at Heart or the Heart of a Warrior, Man Alive, or whatever weekends you're going to with it, or any kind of event where there's just a lot of information being thrown at you. I'm in the midst of a 2 weeks of training right now, as I just started a new role in small business and sales and all that. And there's so much information that's thrown at you, so it can be in any direction and anywhere. I'm not just in ministry, but you don't always take in everything that's thrown at you at the time. Our minds can't process it all, right? We're just not built to really process everything that we learn in it, even. So it takes time, so you have to be able to give yourself some grace and time to be able to absorb the concepts and absorb the ideas and thoughts that are being thrown at you during all that. And so that's what's been so good about this book that Morgan just released this week, and I'll post the link to it in the YouTube page. But one of the things that we did at that weekend, that Morgan encouraged us, and the facilitators and the mentors and sages at that weekend really encouraged us attending to do, is commit ourselves to a decade of allowing God to excavate us, of a full excavation of our hearts from the deepest parts of our masculine soul, and committing to that's a big deal. You're talking a decade, and in the span of your lifetime, a decade is maybe 10% of your life, right? Depending on how long you live, obviously. But think about it, but when we think about it in the moment and think about the idea of how long a decade is, and I sit there and look at it. That's just a long time to commit to something. If I give a decade or more to be able to really dive into some kind of commitment of some type, and it's been something that's that kind of floats through my mind here and there, of because God is he's definitely shown up and continues to excavate my heart in different ways through all this. And then this week, one of the things that has really begun to hammer into my heart and all that is this idea that Morgan talks about of becoming a generalist, and what that means, and becoming a generalist in the course of our lives. And I'm going to read a couple things from Becoming a King, just to kind of share kind of Morgan's interpretation of that, and what that means to become a generalist. And he says, to become a generalist is to name the universal qualities God has set within our masculine soul, and to partner with him in the restoration of every one of these qualities. So wherever we find ourselves and whoever we find ourselves with, the world can rest knowing that what it will encounter and benefit from is first and foremost a man. And the idea that one of the great losses of the Industrial Revolution and the information age is that men have primarily become specialists and have skipped over the critical stage of becoming a generalist. He goes on to say that there are parts of us that are atrophied and are now in the shadow of what was once intended. I'll add one more thought from it that really kind of stuck home and kind of begins to kind of hammer this home. It says, the world loves to champion the pursuit of our unique calling and vocation and gifting and contributing to the world and contribution to the world. But what if, before we can ever walk out that particular expression of God in us, we must first walk out the general expression of God in us? So that's been this idea of being a generalist, of allowing God to really kind of father me and grow me in different aspects of my life and the way I do things, the things I'm able to do, not outsourcing some of the little things in my life, and all that has been something kind of wild, but something I haven't really dove into a ton over the last 4 years since committing to this decade. And I've done some projects here and there, but one of the things that really kind of hit me yesterday as I was thinking through this, I just finished a morning run and was listening to a podcast on that, and with Morgan and some of the other guys from Ransom Heart, and that helped start that intensive up many years ago. And it was to try to put words to it. One of the things that really struck out to me is that for many years, for most of my adult life, I had settled into being, from a vocational standpoint, being a specialist. I had been comfortable, I've been secure in my specialty of what and the things that I knew I was supposed to be able to do. I was the numbers guy, the analytics guy, the guy that did the statistics. I was the Excel spreadsheet expert, all that stuff. And I'm not saying those are bad things at all. But one of the things that I've realized is that in all that, I've become so comfortable in that specialty, and God really, I really put words to this, and I think He's kind of helped interpret this, that He rescued me from that specialization, from that specialty, from that security and comfort last year, from a place where I had been so comfortable in what I was doing in life, in every aspect. And He forced me into an area and a time and a season in life where I have to choose to be uncomfortable each and every day, um, in a position to where everything I have and everything I do is I can't do anything without fully trusting Him. And it's been interesting to kind of process all that, um, and knowing that in all of those, when you talk about, like I talked about last week, when you talk about getting let go from a job, your kind of world gets reeled a little bit. Like, what am I doing? And that's certainly a lot of the questions that I fought through all that. Um, but I was able to redeem that time, and God was really a part of that time and that effort of being able to redeem what was happening in that, and I was able to really to step in and try some things that some things I've always wanted to try doing. I had did my first wood project where I built a sword stand, that we used at the Anvil weekends, which I thought came out of nowhere, totally led by the Father, and I had no concept of it, but I just kind of stepped into and started cutting plywood and 2x4s, and shaped this awesome stand that holds two broadswords, um, very well. It's a very cool display, and I was very pumped about being able to really step into something like that. I'd never done a project like that before. Other kind of from a generalist standpoint of, one of the things I love to do and try doing is baking, right? I love that process uh, of bringing it all together, of all the pieces and the ingredients that it takes to make whatever it is that you're making, whether it's a cake. I did pretzels, uh, donuts, cake, all kinds of and different things. Garlic rolls. If you've ever been to Provino's, the Italian restaurant that's local here in the Atlanta area, I tried making a version of those garlic rolls, and that was very good, actually. Even though they were probably the size of a cat head biscuit, even though those rolls were a lot smaller, but you know what? They were still good. Anyway, but the other thing that I think God really showed me is, last week, like I said, I'm in the middle of training in this new role. We'll all be covering a few thousand square miles of area and selling to small businesses around Northeast Georgia, and really partnering with them, and helping them protect their businesses and help manage their businesses in different ways. And what I realized from that is that God really put me in this role where it's now he's put me in from this area of comfort and kind of security to where now I'm in this the lowest seat of the table, where I have to fully trust and depend on everything He's going to provide, right? And so it's been wild to kind of see that kind of come to fruition. And it's brought me back to this whole idea of God continuing to excavate, this whole idea of a decade. And a decade is 10 years, right? And talking about that again, 10-year span. I'm 4 years into that decade, only 4 years. So still another 6 years, and it doesn't stop with the decade. It's just mind you, it's just dedicating yourself to a period where that is what you're after, is allowing God to really excavate your heart, and the becoming who God meant when He meant each one of us. That process still continues beyond that. But knowing that there's still another 6 years just in this decade alone, that's quite a bit of time, when you think of it. And yes, it can go by fast, but that's still a lot of things that can happen. A lot has happened in 4 years. A lot has happened in the 5 years since I've really surrendered my life to Christ. And so it's realizing that it's okay. I don't have to rush this process. And something that Alex Burton, he's on the Ransom Heart team, and a good guy. I got to have some conversation with him at the intensive, and but something he said from when they did their first intensive over a decade ago, that God really gave him interpretation on, was said, what, and he asked him, what if you commit to this decade, and at the end of the decade you pass away? would it be worth it? I think about that a lot because, most of the men that go through this weekend, it's not just this book isn't just for men in this age bracket, but it's most of the men are in their, in the decade of their 30s. And at the time I went, I was 37 years old. So now I'm pushing 42. And at the end of that decade, I'll be 47, right? And that's one of the things that really kind of hit me is kind of thoughts of my own mortality kind of coming in, of how much time am I going to have left? And we don't know. I don't know when God's going to take back his breath at all. But would it be worth it? Do I look at this and think, oh, I don't want to waste, I've got to figure this out. I've got to step into this. I've got to rush into it because I might run out of time. Or do I still commit to the decade? And no matter what, even if my life were to end at the end of this decade, to know that it was worth it, that I've learned to love my life well. I've learned to walk in deeper union with God. I've learned to not yield mastery of my own life and my own domain to others. I've learned to really embrace the idea of becoming. I've learned to, again, love my family well, love my kids well, because at the end of the day, I don't want to come to the end of that, and if I do pass for whatever reason, and I want my kids and my wife and those that love me the most and are closest to me to have really known me and not just some shadow of who I am. So again, this whole idea of becoming is something that takes time, but it's a decade commitment that to answer that question that God posed to Alex. Yes, I think it would very well be worth it to commit to the decade, even if at the end of that decade my life were to end here on this side of eternity. So that's kind of where I am right now, and just kind of thinking about kind of how God's using this and this this message of becoming the kind of man that God can trust with the care of his kingdom, as Morgan phrases it, I think is huge. So I just want to share that. I just wanted to share those thoughts and just allow you and just encourage you to just maybe pause and kind of ask yourself and kind of, what is your posture in all of that? What if you were to commit yourself to a decade of becoming, of allowing God to continue to really excavate, not just sit here at some surface level scripture study and all this stuff that we see pass as Christianity so much, where it's your typical the typical church life. I just, for lack of a better word, I'm just going to say that the typical Christian church life. Would you be willing to commit yourself to a decade of deeper excavation, of allowing yourself to go deeper, even if, and no matter, because it doesn't matter if people understand where you're processing, how you're processing it, because this is about you and your journey and what God is doing in you, and how God wants to help you become who he meant when he met you. And so that's really where I am. So just I encourage you to kind of pause and think about that. What becoming is, becoming a son, becoming a daughter, and accepting and receiving that identity, and the process of becoming the warrior and the kind of man or woman you were meant to become. It's there for every single one of us, and God's really trying to shape us and mold us in that. So that's really where I am, friends, and it's been a wild thing to process. And I know this thing will continue to process as I go over time, with all the things that God's continuing to do in my life. And I'll look forward. I look forward to being back next week, and I'll share more thoughts on this as God continues to work on me, and I can continue to just to process it all. So I want to thank you again, friends. I just want to thank you for joining me for this week's Fire Pit Conversation. As I stand out here in the rain, and it starts to come down a little bit more. So I'm going to get back and get dry. So thank you again for joining me, friends, and I pray that you have a wonderful weekend and a blessed week, and I will see you next time.